I really wish that we still had Sinkera and Labumba, Patrice, Nkrumah, but we've lost them, and in the midst, and and they were all replaced, almost all replaced with a bunch of puppet masters. And this is where we are right now. So I would like to ask you, Jude, where do we go from here, based on everything that you've heard? How can I mean? You've heard everything that Petka had to say, Rakoya to Niger. For the most part, tonight was a very. I promise you, this is not a discussion that needs to stop. And maybe this is something that I can do every Friday because, to be honest with you, I feel like there's a lot of chips still on our shoulders in regards to how we communicate, the things we're still holding against each other, the things that we allow ourselves, like, am I going to allow you to say this about me, or am I going to allow you to not say this about me? We're not seeing ourselves like we should. And at the same time, war is being waged on us as a people. So we need to put all these things aside and just deal with the realities and facts as they are. Period, point blank. So, Jude, from everything that you've heard, what would you like to include in this discussion? I will be leaving soon, so I'm going to give you and then we'll all be closing out. So go ahead, Jude. Tell me what you think.
Thank you so much. So my name is Jide. Jide. Thank you so much, Gina, for giving me this opportunity. My name is actually Jide.
No, Jude, I'm sorry. I
Thank
keep
you.
saying Jude. Sorry.
Okay, Baba Jide. Okay, thank you. So I've had everything that everyone has said, and I've learned a lot today. But I actually want to. I think all the arguments, all the emotions, all the back and forth, the agreement, disagreement. I think the problems we have as Africans, either the ones in Africa or the ones in the diaspora, in the United States, in the Caribbean. I think everything going on right now is a manifestation of our past. Is a manifestation of the trauma of our past, of our history. So the differences that we have, the cultural differences, I would try to simplify it as much as possible. In Africa, after the slave trade, um, we were colonized, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. We were colonized by the Europeans. Most of us, we still retain our African languages. We still retain remnants. I call it remnants, quote unquote, of our African culture. Remnant, not the essential African culture, but the remnants of our African culture. But eventually, we are colonized. We have a Western colonized mindset. Our African spirit has been diminished. Likewise, in the diaspora as well, it's about integration. We are integrated with Western civilization. Like the United States of America is built from Western civilization. So I won't say it's impossible, it's almost impossible to say you want to develop an African culture in the United States. Um, having said that, um, as a group of people, one of our major problems is we have been struck by cultural banditry. I call it cultural banditry, cultural invasion. And one of the major factors in which has led to the cultural pathology that we have, because the reason why I call it cultural pathology is that we don't have the right culture that will make us progress as a group of people. We don't. Um, the cultural banditry that we're experiencing as Black people is not based on us ourselves, but the manifestation of our past. And not just that. The educational system is a political tool by the oppressor to ensure that the African spirit is destroyed, both in Africa and in the diaspora. The religious institutions, I know this might be uncomfortable for so many people, but that's the truth. The religious institutions, the churches, the mosques, they are there to enhance communities, but at the same time, they are not there to restore our Africanness. All those things create division. Also there are so many factors, there are so many dynamics to all these things. I don't know if I can say some of these things. This might sound controversial. This might sound a bit controversial, but there are so many other fundamental differences that have led to huge cultural and fundamental differences. I'm going to go into history. Like in Africa, we have a strong, more formidable family structure. But due to the oppressive system we have in the United States, the family structure of blacks have been destroyed due to the system in place. And that has also influenced so many things in terms of differences. Um, Another thing I also want to say is like that Rukoya mentioned something about geography. One of the major, apart from geography, one of the major downfalls or one of the major impediments to the progress of our civilization in comparison to other civilizations across the globe is not just geography. Geography is one major one, and I completely agree with most of the things she said. Another factor is diversity. One of the things that led to our downfall is diversity, and that was what the oppressors exploited. We are highly diverse. There was no commonality. If you look at the Middle East, for instance, it's an Islamic majority society. If you look at Europe, they are mostly have geographical similarities, and they also have Christianity. Christianity is the foundation of Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values. If you look at Asia, I mean India, China, if you look at those places, they have more commonalities like Hinduism, Buddhism. But in Africa, what you see is that we are extremely diverse. There is extreme diversity. And that was what was exploited by our oppressors during the slave trade and during colonization. And it's a big impediment, to why as a collective we can't move forward. In fact, so I know one of my fellow brothers mentioned something about Ethiopia and about Morocco, and I learned a lot from that. The fact that Morocco, at some point, Morocco didn't want to belong to Africa, the African continent. If you look at Ethiopia as well, this might sound controversial again, but if you look at Ethiopia as well, some of them don't align with Africa. They align with the Middle East. So the point I'm trying to make is that an heterogeneous group of people, it's easier to conquer them compared to homogeneous group of people. Look at the Middle East, for instance. If you look at the Middle East, it's still very difficult for the West to conquer the Middle East, particularly the Arab world. And I'm not trying to defend any religion or anything, but I'm trying to look at things in a social perspective. If you look at that region, it's very hard for them to conquer that region because they have an Islamic spirit. That's why it's very hard for them to be conquered. One of the major problems we have is not actually military conquest by the West. It is mostly cultural and economic. And that is what is still affecting us up to today. That is why we can't come together, because we are struggling with cultural warfare. The biggest warfare Black people are facing right now is cultural. It's cultural warfare. Not even the fights with war and killings and all the sad things we hear going on. Military conquest, invasion, that's just bits of it. The major problem we have as a group of people is cultural and economic. Economic warfare and cultural warfare. That is why we are at the bottom end, and that is why we are still going through the trauma of our past. The cultural warfare is highly immense because it's the level of oppression we have. Other people have experienced it. The Jews, they've been oppressed. They've also been oppressed. But one thing they have in common is the spiritual commonality. If you look at I talked about the Islamic world. If you look at the Islamic world as well, if you look at the Middle East, for instance, if you look at the Middle East, it's still very hard. It's a place of volatility. They are still struggling to conquer the region. The West is still struggling to conquer that region just because they have the same voice of Islam. But I don't want to go deep into global politics, but that's just the point. But we are conquered. The thing is, we are conquered. So we have to unwire a lot of things within ourselves, and that might take a lot of effort and consciousness. It's going to take a lot of effort and consciousness. And outside this group with my fellow brothers and sisters, if you look at the reality, I know we keep talking about the reality. The reality is that majority of us, we are lost with what I'm talking about. We are culturally lost and we are economically lost because we have to integrate into this system in order to thrive economically. So yeah, it's almost like a paradox. It's almost like a paradox. Well, it's not a paradox. We can still fix our problems. But I think what we need to do is we have to do a cultural reevaluation. I think as a group of people entirely, either the ones that we in America, in the UK, in the Caribbean, in Africa, as Black people, we need to do thorough cultural evaluation. We can establish bodies, maybe through our elites. Even though our elites, unfortunately, they're also oppressors, sadly. But we need to start investing in cultural reevaluation, even the religious side, not the entire our entire cultural evaluation, not just how we interact, not just how we greet, not just our food, not just how we live our life, also our spirituality. We need to reevaluate everything, and I think that will be extremely difficult. But that's the solution if we really want to come together. Because if we say we should just come together and we have these differences and we still have the trauma of our past, from everything I've explained, it's going to be extremely difficult.
Yeah.
When you said trauma, let me just add something very quickly. When you said trauma, I think I take that point because when somebody's suffering from traumatic event, they tend not to be very rational about things. However, when you talk about diversity, I think sometimes people mistake Europe for being homogeneous. If you know how many separatist groups that are in Europe, you'll be shocked. I was surprised to see the list. They are actually active. And these are people that hate each other with a venom. And our group, the problem with our group is that we are.
I'm sorry.
Let me just finish one point that you can take it. The problem with our group is that, and I think this is very critical, because we have what they call individual, highly creative and these intelligent people, but in terms of group action, our IQ is relatively low, and that is the key. And I think it's tied to some of the cultural things you talk about. But our diversity could be a strength, and I think if our leaders and people like you and everybody here think of diversity and in a way as a strength, you'll find that it's actually a strength, because in nature, diversity is actually favored from that point of view. So you have to tap into what nature is telling you, that our diversity shouldn't be our problem, it should be our strength. And our group, the way we think in terms of group, that is our problem. Individually, we can take on any white man, we can take on any Indian, we can take on, at the moment we have shown to be able to do that. But the way we work together right now is being disrupted, and I think it was disrupted a while ago. And like you use the term, we are conquered people. That is what, when you get conquered, that's what happens. And we have to now work our way out of it. Thank you.
Can I respond to, I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. And I'm going to get everybody, I hope when I'm finished saying what I'm saying, I hope everybody on the panel is mad as hell at me. You're going to get angry about what I'm going to say, but I have to say it.
Okay.
Everybody here had a pet. Were you familiar with dogs, right? I mean, most people here, whether you have them as pet or not, you've observed their behavior.
Yeah.
So when I was a child going to school, one of the things we used to do is we would tease dogs when we went by. Of course, the dog is behind the fence, behind the gate, and the dog would be frothing at the mouth because the school children tease the dog and it barks, and you know how dogs get, right? Then an adult would pass by and the dog would stay still. The dog wouldn't move. And what I learned as an adult was that if you ill-treat a dog or provoke it, the dog responds in one of two ways. It'll bark when it sees you coming, it'll attack you, or it'll run. Right? I think we all established that flaw.
Yeah.
So let's look at how Black people behave when we are enslaved, beaten, castrated, and harmed by foreigners. Do we run when we see them coming? Do we attack them? Is that how we behave? Or do we try to embrace them, love them, and even try to bring them in the heart of our religion? You see white people in the heart of Ife. Again, I compare our behavior to dogs, so you ought to feel insulted by that. So I just compare how a dog be. So we don't have the sense of animals. We don't have the sense of animals. But anyway, I digress. Another thing I want to talk about is, let's see how insulting that analogy is. If you go back to China around 1880 or so, the time of the so-called Boxer Revolution, I forgot the name of the Chinese guy now. His name might come to my mind as I speak. But the Chinese slogan there was all foreigners and foreign religion out. China kicked out in England and all the foreigners around 1880,
Yes.
and they did not open themselves back up until Richard Nixon had ping-pong diplomacy around 1970. And China said to Nixon, you can come in here and open business, Coca-Cola or whatever, if you want to tap into this Chinese market. But the only condition is you absolutely must have a Chinese person embedded in every aspect of your business, learning and shadowing you in terms of what you do. Again, please, easy to rebut. All you got to say is that's not true, and come up with one example. And within 30 years after that program, by the year 2000, within 50 years, who is number one in the world in manufacturing? Do you know which country that is? Can anybody guess?
China.
You know who is doing the same thing as we speak? North Korea. North Korea is poorer than 90% or probably half of all African nations. Do you know what would happen to a North Korean if he or she is caught leaving North Korea to be a refugee swimming across the Mediterranean? Does anybody know what will happen to them? They will be shot. North Korea says, you can say what you want about us, and North Korean decide we can't eat, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a nuclear weapon. In other words, if you've got jewelry or wealth in your house, as Africa does, when you go to bed at night, you lock your house, you put on burglar proof, right? Because you don't want people to come in there and steal your wealth or whatever you have. Which nation in Africa has built any army indigenous to your armament that's strong enough to repel a foreign invader? How can you possibly own something in your house when anybody can walk in and take it?
Damn.
Like Gina said, I'm gonna have to come back up here some other time because I don't want to. When I get going, it seems as though I take a long time. Now that I've discovered this channel, I'll try to monitor it, and if I have time, I'll come back at some later time. But
you have to come back. You have to. You're part of the family now. We need your voice. Thank you.
Yeah. And one thing, we don't have a winning strategy. It is something. If you, I noticed that we talk about other people in other nations. We talk about Christianity. Christianity is Eurocentric. They put Europe at the core, at the center of that. At least the version of Christianity we have. In Islam, Arab is at the core. In fact, if you study Islam, they're forced you to learn Arabic. Isn't that right? India put Hindu at the core. That is who they are. Hindus first. You try to put in the Yoruba nation, you can't even put, there are more Yorubas in Brazil than there are probably in Nigeria. You can't even get in the Yoruba nation to put Yoruba religion first. So we have a lot of examples. If you want to see what a woman would look like when you marry her, look at her mother. If you want to be successful, look at how successful nations became successful, and you pick a path and follow it. If you refuse to do that, well, try to reinvent the wheel if you can. I am shutting up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, okay. So we got a couple of folks that,
please, can I respond to Niger?
I know you want to respond, but we got to get through. Okay, but briefly, please.
Very
and then,
brief.
of course, gonna respond to you, right? Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you to Niger. Like, I understand what you're saying. I agree. Like, I was just going to add that. I think you misunderstood my point. I know that Europe is diverse, but we need to understand that in Europe, the Europeans were not conquered, apart from the Moorish invasion. The culture of the Europeans evolved. It's evolved. Our culture evolution started. Another thing we need to understand is that if you look at Europe, if you look at Western Europe in particular, despite the diversity, you had the Roman Empire. They still have historical relationship. If you look at Nigeria, just even look at Nigeria as a case study. The Yoruba and the Igbo, we didn't really have historical relationship until colonization. But if you look at the Roman Empire, if you look at the Byzantine Empire, if you look at what do you call it, the Eastern, Orthodox Christianity and all that, that formed, should I say, an homogeneous group. If you look at the Middle East, for instance, when I talk about Islam In Iran, you have different tribes. You have the Persians, you have the Kurds. In Syria, you have the Kurds and all these people. But they are Muslims, right? So that was what I was just trying to say. They are diverse, but they have something in common. What we have in common that is a major, what we have in common, which is what brings us together, is the color of our skin. But outside that, we are culturally diverse. It's good, it's beautiful. I'm not saying it is bad, but there's no commonality.
The fact that we
There is
come
more
together.
than he thinks, and that is what he doesn't seem to understand. There's a lot more than our people realize, and
Yeah,
I
may
think
I say
that
something
has been
after
hidden from
Nigel?
us. I know of a kingdom that speaks Igbo, but their royal family is evolved from the Benin kingdom, and just like the Benin kingdom is tied to the Yoruba kingdom, the Yoruba kingdom is also tied to the Northern kingdom. We always think that we had borders. We didn't have borders. There were always interaction between all the groups, and I don't this idea that our people seem to have now that we are all separate, like there were borders in ancient times. No, that is not true. We are all linked. We've always been linked. And if you look beneath it, that's why our languages are so related. That's why they call it the Niger Congo language family. We have always been
Yeah.
linked.
It doesn't
Thank you.
matter if we have a lot of things in common. It doesn't matter. You see, the white man had a lot of things in common, but they realized that they were all white, and this is how the world viewed them. And then, so they positioned themselves in a place where where they can be more powerful, and their children could be more secure. And the one thing that we do have in common, a couple of things that we do, the most important thing that we have in common, rather, is the fact that we are in a world that only looks at one thing, our blackness, and they treat us in that way. So that thing that they use against us is the same thing we need to use to empower us. I want to give
Exactly.
Rotoya an opportunity to speak, because she's
Sure.
been up all
I've
night. Go
been waiting and I'm going to be ready to just shut down. But anyhow, yeah, I first wanted to commend the gentleman. I think Go Petka, he really, really, brought it home. He had a lot of great points, lots of pieces that come together. But one of the things I wanted to also bring in terms of reality now is that a lot of us still talk and share the talking points of the past. We talk a lot of historical things which are true, but there's a change going on in Africa right now, and we need to be able to recognize the changes that are occurring, and be able to position these changes for the future we're trying to create. I mentioned the other time that there is a big push right now in creating an ECOWAS identity in the sub-region of West Africa. And all the African countries have a mandate between now and 2025 to create one central database within which the citizenry will have a common way of being identified. And Ghana has started pushing it. Togo is pushing it. They're using the same data structure so that we can move interchangeably from one country to the other, which really is the beginning of the collapsing of these artificial borders. Because if I can move from Nigeria with a Nigerian identity card, which will go through Togo, Ghana, and can validate the identity of the person, we have almost, in effect, collapsed this artificial structure that has kept us separate. And I wanted to buttress the fact that Nigeria was making, that a lot of us, again, talking points of Europeans. The gentleman who spoke about diversity in Africa and using that as a point of saying we are too different to unite. That to me is talking the same things that the European used to confuse us. We as Africans, we had a history. Our history, which was pre-European, did not represent a people who were separate in fortresses kept apart. Like Tuna just said, truthfully, our people lived with and were connected to each other. Culture is identified not only by language, it's by food, it's by customs, it's about rituals. If you move from one African country, move along to the others, you see the natural emergence of language. And our cultures are almost all the same. There's no African from Nigeria to Sierra Leone who doesn't eat okra or some form of fufu or some form of. It is, I mean, we need to stop listening to Western interpretations of ourselves and using that as the talking point for our division. We are more similar than we are separate. And even if you look at the Igbos and the Yorubas and what is going on in Nigeria right now, where people are all taking positions of I am Westerner, I am Easterner, we need to go separate ways. It is ridiculous because even the DNA of Igbos and Nigerians has only 1 point difference. An Igbo and a Yoruba person as using genetic markers are not different. They're very the same. So that means you come from a common ancestry. Some people say we come from Israel because they want to be Jewish. This is ridiculous. Let's look at the science. Let's look at our language. We are the same people. Our cultures are not that difficult. If Europeans, if a British can find identity with a Belgian, or even in Spain today, the Catalonians are trying to get themselves out of there. They want to separate. These people are the Basque, they are so different, more different than we in Africa can be in a nation, but they still find commonality in identity. What I really have a problem is we Africans are not generating our own basis and models for moving forward. We want to use what Europe uses to describe us, and we know that the relationship between us and Europe is one of domination and oppression. We can't use their language. We must use our own precepts to move forward. So indeed, what I wanted to add was that there is hope in Africa. I know a lot of what Mr. Gopetka has said has been pretty negative. It has been pretty depressing. But I tell you, I am in corridors in Ghana, and the conversations give me hope. Our people are moving. Even the people who traditionally were used by the oppressor for divide and conquer, they themselves are waking up. They use a lot of separation between the North and the Southern people. Even the Northerners now are becoming woke. So the time is coming where the African youth are going to begin to form and create this awareness, this mass movement, which we all need to get behind. My closing point is that there is hope for Africa. I see it and I am optimistic. It's not going to be easy, but it's conversations like this between continentals, our Caribbean brothers, and the African Americans who identify as Africans. If they say they are Native Americans, let's give them the side eye and move away because they can't help us. We have to find those who can help us, and we will move forward. Thank you all. I got to go to bed. It's so late in Ghana. See you guys later.
All right. And next time I come up here,
Well
I'm
done.
going to speak positively. I'm going to talk about Thomas Sankara, and I did mention him in passing. And yes, there are some positive examples, and I'll make sure next time that I balance it off with positive. But I'm aware of positive, and I'll speak on it. But not tonight, like you say. I've been talking too much.
No, we appreciate
I think it was positive,
I appreciate
actually.
it.
Mostly positive, if you ask me, because you are highlighting key points. So I don't see that as you being negative. I don't think that's what she means.
Well, I mean, I did point out that I did say in passing that Thomas Sankara provided a blueprint, but I didn't go into any detail. But
Yeah.
some of us here who are familiar with that experiment in Burkina Faso knew that within 5 years, I think it wasn't even, I don't even know if it's that long because Thomas Sankara didn't stay in power that long. The first thing he did is he changed the name from Upper Volta, right, to Burkina Faso, which I understand in the native language means land of the upright, upstanding people. He made integrity part of the culture. He himself, drove around not in a presidential limo, but in some basic Renault or some basic car. He stopped imports, forced people to live off the fat of the land, as it were. Within 5 years or so, poverty rates went down dramatically. Literacy rate increased. I mean, I said 5 years, not 50, not 25-year plan. I mean, yes, Burkina Faso is a small nation, but so we have examples. We can go back to Kwame Nkrumah and the plans he had for a united Africa, which some of which is now coming about today, that the lady just spoke about, this business about an African passport. That was discussed way back before 1960. But part of we had those core African leaders back then that, not surprisingly, like including the current ambassador, Chiambari Kwa, or whatever, the woman who they kicked out from the African Union. These were people who were educated, ironically enough, in Black universities in the U.S. And so they came out at a time where they were familiar with, I don't want to use the word Black power, but certainly an Afrocentric point of view. Ironically enough, some of the history we teach in the Caribbean and other places seem to be more Afrocentric than what they teach in Africa. I know my own mother, spoke a language, kind of broken French. She was from St. Lucia. They call it Creole or whatever it is, with French Creole or whatever. And my house was like the United Nations, because I had aunts and cousins, like most people from the Caribbean. We migrate all over the place. And when they come, some speaking in Papiamento, which is broken Dutch, and Portuguese. My mother would speak to people from Haiti, Martinique. There's language. I learned it from my mother a little bit. I don't know it as much as my aunt from Venezuela, they speak in Spanish, my cousins. So this idea of the fact that we have many different languages, or for want of a better word, tribe, I think it's a red herring. Somebody made a statement that Europe wasn't conquered. That's not quite true. The word Hungary came from Attila the Hun. He ran amok in Europe and kind of overran that place. Then we had Genghis Khan also, who overran Europe. Europe used to have tribes just as they do in Africa. One of the reasons why Europe no longer has tribes was an accident of history. It came out of what? The Pope, right? That's one of the Catholic, if you've been in the Catholic religion, they have something called the papacy, right? The Pope was a patriarch. He was the holy what? Father, the Papa. That's where the word papacy comes from. And so what the Catholic Church did is they went through and they stopped tribal practices where, in order to keep the wealth in the tribe, only people within that tribe could marry each other. So they stopped that practice, forced tribes to intermarry, and eventually over time, the tribalism in Europe was decreased. But if you go to Ireland today, go to Wales or some of these people, you'll see that they don't even speak English. They got stuff written up in different language, but English is the common language that keeps them together. So I think the idea of tribalism is overplayed in Africa. They got tribes in India, they got tribes in China and stuff like that. What we do not learn as Black people is that race is always stronger than tribe, and we refuse to put race first. That is the fundamental problem Black people, in fact, I would say if there's one problem we have, it is that we continue, just as somebody say, oh, I'm indigenous to America. The other one say I'm foundational Black, ADOS. Somebody from the Caribbean, somebody from Northern Nigeria, the other one from East and West. And fundamentally, as repeatedly, the common theme that we all have is that when non-Black people look at us, they don't give a F about any of those demographics I just named. They say, here's an N-word, he's an enemy, and we got to keep him out, we got to crush him, oppress him. And what we need to do is say, F you, we're going to unite just as you, and we don't want to get along with you. No, we want to crush you too. We have to have a Black superiority complex, a centric view. We want to dominate the world. If you're playing chess, you don't want to win, you don't want to checkmate the king, you don't want to dominate, you better get off the board. We are being dominated. The Chinese want to dominate. The people from India want to dominate. The Arab want to dominate. The European want to dominate. We want to get along. We want to get along. That's what we want to do.
Nope.
Have people love us and get along when everybody's trying to dominate. Don't get along.
can't drop the mic because it won't fall.
Man.
Hey! Woo! Okay. So, my sister, you've been very patient. You and Big Z. Who wants to go first?
Yes, greetings, Tina. Greetings, everyone.
Blessings and welcome.
There's been so much said, and I missed the first 3 hours. But I want to say, first of all, my condolences for what's happening in Haiti.
We are strengthened. We're going to get through this. We're strong. We're going to get through this.
And I heard you were saying, like, this is not normal. This is not regular, this kind of earthquake. And I wanted to talk about that for a minute. Just, we know that since these different oil companies and that have been, and it could be other kind of companies, but they've been fracking, and there's been earthquakes that in places that never had earthquakes before, all across America, as well as in Haiti. And I remember when the last earthquake happened, I saw this video, and it was like an engineer in Haiti. He had his like gear on, and he was talking about the people at the port or something. And they were saying how there was this some kind of mining going on, and that they had an idea that this mining was causing these earthquakes there in Haiti. And we know it happens here, so why not the same kind of thing? I mean, when you're like drilling underground, they push all this water pressure, and you know, the different techniques they have. So I don't find it like a natural occurrence.
Trust me, none of this is none of what's happening to us as a people is a natural occurrence.
And I want to say also about what the president went through. I saw this program, and it was talking about the last 10 minutes or something. I don't remember what channel it was on, but it talked about the phone calls that he was making to try to get somebody to help them. And no one was responding. All this security, I forget the name of the officials that he was calling, like, you know, like in America, it'd be like the chief of the FBI or the head of the FBI or chief of police or something. He was just calling all these different officials to try to get help, because he heard the gunshots like coming from like when it was far away. And as they kept getting closer, he knew what was happening, but it was a setup. And now we find out, you know, the U.S. has a lot to do with it. They're involved. We can't act like you said, that this is out of nowhere. And so I want to say that somebody in the comments, and a lot of times people say, oh, let's not talk about history. Let's talk about what's happening now. And sorry, guys, that's my thing. History is my thing. And ancient history is really my thing. You know, I like all history. But I want to talk about the oneness before white people came.
Okay.
And I want to talk about the whitewashing and how we don't understand the oneness. We put ourselves in these little boxes. Oh, I'm from here, I'm from there. But as the other brother who was speaking at length, he said a few times about how he was saying more that the mixed race people would take over. But I think that's just like a middleman, you know, for a minute until they just like genocide everybody. You know, they may be there for a while, but then they're gonna go too. Like, for example, in Europe, when we know that the first Europeans were Black people, they had names like Etruscans, and we really have to take what we learn in school with a grain of salt. A lot of it is very whitewashed. A lot of the characters of the people that we learn about are Black, African people, original people, but they're told to us that they're white, so we don't look there. As Gina, I heard you say something about the Chinese pyramids in China. They're, all in Asia, all the originals were Black. The Nagas, the Buddha with his, kinky hair. So I want to talk about what I study is the epics, the ancient epics, and I want to put this towards that brother Thunderdog, because I was listening yesterday. He was, this idea of why people have the social distance, as you said, between the Africans and the continent and the African Americans. And I think that goes to the fact that the Africans came here before, like the one Ivan Van Sertima says, they came before Columbus. So yes, there were Africans here before. These so-called Indians were here before. But at the same time, they're the same people. They're still Africans. They're still came from the same source. They came from Kemet. They have these giant ships. We had great ships. And we traveled around the whole earth. Our whole earth was ours. So, of course, people were here. And there's stories about them. And there's artwork. You see the pictures of the ancient Mayans. They got braids. They got fades, like tall fades. They look like Kid and Play in there. And I was the Asians, when I look at names a lot. I was one day I was like, okay, well, let me look up what the Asians mean, the Xi, and I found out Xi and An. So I'm like, well, what's the Xi? So I looked up Xi, X-I. And the first thing that came up on Google were those heads, those so-called Olmec heads.
Yeah.
So it's like our people everywhere. And then what happened? They got whitewashed and taken over. What I like to say is, by clones or whatever. But the thing is that there's actual stories. And we just don't know it because we think it's somebody else. And these ancient epics, like called the Ramayana is one, the Mahabharata is another one, and in Egypt they said they had the Tamahu, which they called the created people. So the story is that our ancient ancestors created these other races from themselves. They used their DNA and they mixed it with animals. And they created these people to be their slaves. And they slaved them up for who knows how many years. And then they rebelled. And all this is in the ancient stories that we call myths. And they don't want to tell us it. They don't want us to know. Because they don't want to be looked at like that they're the ones that they say themselves they came from monkeys. That's them. And they didn't come naturally from monkeys. And as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the last days. What are we doing today? DNA science, GMO science. We can, by this technology of the CRISPR, we can take a DNA from one thing and put it into the other thing. So let's not be ignorant about how we got here. Let's not be like, oh, we just don't know why. We just, we have to take responsibility, and then we can be in our proper position to know that, it says in the Bible, it says it right there. It was the sons of Ham that got cursed. His curse got put to his sons because those souls had to incarnate in those bodies that they had created. And they got stuck in what they created because there's only one planet, one people, one soul. And so it's all mixed up. And just like the Chinese want to say they didn't come from Africans, they didn't come from Black people, but now the DNA is proving they did. So we can't say they didn't come from us. We can't be not responsible. And that's why we're going to have to keep going to the end. And that's why they're trying to get rid of us. And scientifically, the sperm count of all men is going down, especially white men. Their sperm count is so low, they can barely have any babies. That's why they haven't had that in vitro fertilization since the 70s. They've been having to clone themselves since the 70s. Straight up, they take a woman's egg and they can put sperm or DNA, not just sperm, but DNA from two men and make a baby. And they've been doing it for a while, or even however, if they want to just put DNA from one man, whatever. They do this. Look it up. It's not a secret. They're doing it because they cannot have babies the natural way as well, and as the same rate, because they're not natural, because their time is up. The sun is different. The sun and the stars and all that is made for like a clock, right? For signs of the times. We are in the last days, as they say, The Mayans were right. And whenever this thing started, you guys, it was December 2019, right? Well, that's according to the Gregorian calendar. According to the Julian calendar, which Ethiopia still has, at that time, it was actually 2012. And since that time, we've been in this, tribulation that we've all been going through, where everything has been shut down in the world. And all of us have had to see that there's a huge change happening and have to, have all this time to think and be alone. And we're going through it. So it's like, as it was in the beginning, so shall it be in the end, as they say.
Yeah.
And it's a oneness. And I just want to add one more thing. The brother said something about there was no Islamic slaves, and that's not true at all. So many people who were Islamic or Islam were enslaved. In Brazil, a lot of them. And I can prove it. There's been books I can't remember the name, but there's one particular famous book of a slave that he wrote this book. He was Islamic or whatever, so he could write. But besides that, it's in the music, it's in the songs. In Capoeira, they have these songs they sing, and they're straight up the same songs they sing in Senegal, the Baifal. They sing La ilaha illallah over there while they're playing capoeira. La 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 la. They sing it, and when I finally figured that out after years, and I shared it with this Senegalese brother, they have a couple ways they sing it, and he told me that's the same thing we sing. We sing that too. And I'm like, what about this one? He's like, yeah, we sing that too. So it's really a oneness. And the separation of like, you're this, you're that. I'm so tired of it. I'm so over it. And I'm tired of people telling me something's freaking from them, from Europeans or whatever, because it's not. Everything came from the original people. Everything, including the freaking Europeans. So
let me ask you something, Sis.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
In regards to what we were talking about, to the earlier discussion, I know we've moved away from that. What do you think can change the dynamics in our relationship? Let's say, the relationship that the tension between the immigrants and African Americans at this point.
Well, in my own life, what I've found is what's worthy of respect. I think that people don't respect each other. And I found Rastafari, I found Marcus Garvey, and I'm like, here's a black man who's worthy of respect, and so I think that's what it is. I think that we have to find something that's worthy of respect. In the Bifal of Senegal, I found a Sheikh Indigo Fall. I found the city of Tuba. I found some people that work together worthy of respect. The way these brothers, they come together and they work to build something. They have trust in someone. They'll give their money to someone to build a hospital, to build a school, to build a college, because they respect this person.
Yeah.
And I find that beautiful. I find that so beautiful for one black man to respect another black man, to greet each other with love, like real pure love. And that's why I love the Rastafarians, and I love the Bifal in Senegal, and I love how they treat each other.
That's beautiful. And I agree. Respect is very important, and it's like we got to learn how and what respect means to the other person based on their culture. Thank you.
And one last thing I just want to say about the whole Christianity. I'm gonna say first. I can say a lot about and Islam, but again, they all come from the same root. The other day I was watching something and a brother was quoting, it was word for word, this Egyptian text from, I can't remember the Egyptian guy, but word for word, it was something from the Bible, but it was an Egyptian, written by some Egyptian. And I've seen that in some of the Indian writings and the Upanishads, word for word, the Psalms, word for word. So I'm just tired of people trying to separate and everything, saying this is this and this is. They don't know. If they knew, they would see it's word for word sometimes the same.